And we are back with another episode of From the Rafters. Sam and I are here with another guest. We have the voice of the Celtics, Sean Grande, on the show today. How are you doing today, Sean?
I'm doing great, guys. I like the coordinated Marcus Smart jerseys. I think it's nice.
Hey, thanks.
Nice symmetry.
He's a universal stability figure throughout all Celtics fans, I would say. He's pretty much universally loved. Well, for the most part.
I agree. I was, I kind of started a campaign early this year. It's been a long time. It's been 7 years now since we've had a captain. Mm-hmm. And for whatever that's worth at certain times, certain places, and obviously in the whole Kyrie Irving, Al Horford situation, it would have made sense. But to me, if you're talking about sort of the natural progression and if there's going to be a captain, it would be Marcus Smart.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Sam always argues that he is the leader of the team, and I agree. I've had a couple people on Twitter tell me that that's wrong, but I don't understand their argument in that case.
People on Twitter arguing? Stop it.
Completely unheard of. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that's ever argued on Twitter.
People on Twitter will argue about whatever it is they decided that you said. That's what I've learned is the latest. I had a whole thing about a month ago whenever Anthony Davis hit the buzzer beater for the Lakers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And oftentimes, I don't do it a lot, but oftentimes what I will tweet is something that I would say. Sometimes I'll tweet what my call would have been of a game that's on TV if I'm watching it. In this case, it was my first thought, which is when Anthony Davis hit the buzzer beater. I said, that's why LeBron didn't win the MVP. And I know that to be a fact. Like, that's the reason people vote for. I voted for 18 years for the MVP until they changed the way the votes are done. I know what people were thinking. And the reason that LeBron didn't win is because he plays with Anthony Davis and Giannis. No knock on Chris Middleton, but Chris Middleton is not Anthony Davis, and that's why Giannis won.
Sure.
But in any case, people decided, Laker fans, LeBron fans, of which I'm obviously
the two worst groups.
Well, I've been a LeBron guy. Obviously, it drives Celtic fans crazy, but I've been a LeBron guy since the start. As far as his place in basketball history. But the point being, they all went berserk thinking it was some kind of slam on LeBron. It was just the opposite. Right. I was saying they were like, "What a terrible tweet." Oh, that one didn't age well, and I'm like, it aged perfectly well because it was true then and it's true now. LeBron didn't win the MVP.
He still doesn't have the MVP.
Because he plays with Anthony Davis, not because. Yeah. But among Celtic fans, though, LeBron will always be the guy that went to Miami and he has dashed Celtics dreams time and time and time again.
Yeah, that's always Sam's thought. Sam's a big anti-LeBron guy.
I am not a LeBron guy.
Well, you know what? And so
I think he's good.
You can ask me the questions the rest of the time, but I'll ask you this because I'm fascinated.
Absolutely.
By LeBron's when LeBron plays his final game at TD Garden, 3 years from now, 5 years.
I think about that a fair amount.
I think it's going to be overwhelming love for LeBron in Boston the way it was for Kobe when they were chanting MVP at Kobe's last game. I think that it will be that way eventually. Now, we don't know if there's Lakers-Celtic history that's yet to be written between the two over the next couple of years, and I personally believe LeBron is hanging out with the opportunity to play with his son in 4 years or 5 years or whenever that happens. Right. But all that said, I think that Boston fans who appreciate I think a lot of the hatred towards LeBron is the acceptance and the understanding that he is the best player of this generation, and that's what fuels it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I don't know. I feel like I hope they boo him because I just think that's just the way we treat LeBron here is we don't like him. I mean, now I respect LeBron, but I just don't. I don't know. I think he just has this attitude, cocky. I don't know. He's just so. He's like a diva kind of. There's like a whole lot of things that go into it for me, but I do, of course, there's no denying that he's a great player.
That's your right as a fan is to feel that
way.
I'm fascinated to see when it's all said and done how he ends up feeling about Boston because the Celtics were a very important part of his career. He has a great understanding of the history of the league and how you have to take steps forward and how the Celtics were in his path in 2008 and 2010, and he appreciated more. When the Celtics lost to Miami in 2011, Miami didn't win the championship and LeBron had the bad finals and all that. Watch LeBron's reaction. Go back and watch that, as painful as it may be. When he finally got past the Celtics, LeBron he felt like he had won a championship, even though he was still a year away from actually doing it, because he understood how important it was. And I think, Boston is a difficult place to play for a visiting player, and to have the great teams that he had to get past. I just think, I look at big picture stuff and sort of the history of it, and then arguably the most important game of his career took place there, in 2012 when the Celtics were up 3-2, in the conference finals. So I don't think you can write LeBron's NBA history without putting Boston and the Celtics in it.
Yeah, I'd imagine he feels the same way about the Celtics as the way the fans feel about him. Not that, there's just a mutual distaste but respect. I guess that's the best way to put it.
It's funny because Kobe loved the city of Boston, and he loved the North End, and I think that has to do with his Italian background and his childhood. But he absolutely, it was one of these little known secrets about Kobe that he used to drive around Boston when he was here, and he absolutely loved it. And he was into both the history and the competitive nature of it. And it meant something. Lakers Celtics meant something to him. And I guess that's one of the many shames of what happened a month ago is that we were denied a very bizarre, but yet another Celtics Lakers chapter. This one with LeBron in it.
Yeah,
looking forward to that. Sam and I have had
has gone and made himself the ultimate Celtics villain by joining the Lakers.
Oh yeah,
I think
100%. Sam and I have had the LeBron debate many, many times on the show. We always end up asking whoever we have on their thoughts on LeBron. So it's good to know you're on my side. I've always been I wouldn't say a LeBron guy, but respect. He's one of the best. How do you not enjoy watching him play?
We're all
respecting
biased.
Who he
We're all
is.
biased in our own way. We all have our biases. I said as early as 2006, I remember saying he is going to be the best ever when it's all said and done. So we all tend to go back on. There's a little bit of I call it and you guys are way too young to get the reference, but I call this the down goes Frazier mentality of sportscasters, which is there's a very famous play-by-play call in boxing. Howard Cosell, down goes Frazier when George Foreman beats Joe Frazier, and everybody remembers it because it's down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier. The backstory is Frazier was the favorite in that fight, but Cosell was one of the few people that had picked Foreman. So within the context of that, it was not just down goes Frazier, it was I told you so. Down goes Frazier. So there's an element I see it my way. We're drowned in politics now, right? Everybody sees things their own way. I see it my way, which is that LeBron, in my view, I said 14 years ago, is going to be the best ever when it's all said and done. And he's still on that trajectory. We don't know what has he passed Jordan yet? Has he passed whatever? Probably not. But he's still got 5 years left. He's still one more chip. We don't know what's left. So anyway, that's sort of everybody has their slant. And I think in fairness, and again, Celtic fans don't like to hear it, but in the age of celebrities and star athletes having all kinds of baggage and constantly getting taken down to whatever, LeBron has lived in the spotlight since he was 18 years old. And where is that stuff? I mean, what are we still talking about 9 years later? Well, he had a bad press conference when he went to Miami. Yeah, but a lot of guys have done a lot worse in a lot more high-profile spots.
It's impressive he's gotten this far and is still where he is without, like you said, any of those bad media interactions that so many people have. But wrapping things back around to the Celtics, one of the things we were wondering, sort of with what you do, how has COVID and the whole NBA shutdown and all of that stuff changed the way you've had to cover games and everything like that?
Well, it was a very bizarre few months, obviously, and I think I've answered that question a lot, as you can imagine, in the last few weeks and last few months. Yeah. And I think my answer is that the best compliment that I've gotten, it happened a few times in August and September, is somebody would see me on the street, running around Boston or whatever, and they'd say, I thought you guys were in Orlando. I thought you were in the bubble. And that to me is the best compliment, because it meant that Max and I and the people we worked with and whatever from a production standpoint, we really made you believe that we were there. Yeah, it was very difficult. I'm not going to lie. I think from a preparation standpoint, I've said this many times, we did what we had to do. We all did the best we could do. Players, coaches, broadcasters, referees, everybody. We did our best to give all of you guys the closest we could simulate the product to what it was. But in my job, you can't do my job really well, if you're not with the team. If you're not traveling with the team, if you're not on the plane, if you're not in the hotels, if you're not on the buses, you can't really be a team's announcer doing it this way. Now, you're texting the coach, you're texting people back and forth, whatever. It's different when you've been tenured, but for the most part, you really can't do it properly. All that said, and calling the games off, a TV monitor. That said, I think everybody just grit their teeth and did the best we could do to, you make it what it was. And I think the fact that there was so much angst in Boston about losing in the Miami series, and Brad Stevenson's this, and Marcus Smart just shooting it. And I think there were moments that it was actually beautiful. As annoyed as I got with some of that stuff and how people completely forgot where the expectations were for this team and what they achieved, for all of that, I kind of got a kick out of it, because I said once in a while during games, take a minute to realize what we have in front of us. Because in early July, the discussion was, it's a 50-50 shot we get through this. What happens when LeBron tests positive? What happens when Jason Tatum has a fever and he has to quarantine for a few? And the fact that we got through a mini preseason, 8 regular season games, and 4 full rounds of playoffs and crowned a champion without a single positive test was unthinkable in July. Right. And yet it happened.
Absolute incredible job by the NBA. And it was a great product to watch, too. One thing we were talking about before it happened, we had to dig for things to talk about, was, how is the quality of basketball going to be? Are guys going to play differently because there's no fans? Seeing how they've had time off for months, are they going to be in shape? And it was really great basketball. That Raptors series is one of the most entertaining series we've got to watch in a while, probably up there with the Washington series for sure.
Plus the home team lost every game.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Visually, it wasn't. I mean, they did the best they could. Obviously, visually, I think that's one of the factors with the ratings. Obviously, time shifting and being the wrong season. There were a lot of factors. I think visually, it wasn't remotely as appealing as real games would have been. I think the one thing we learned, and we'll take out of it from a game standpoint, because the quality of basketball was very, very high. And I think we are going to move away from this notion of, well, this guy played 32 minutes last night, so he has to come out of the game, because if he plays 33, his legs will fall off, which always never struck I could never wrap my head around that. Like pitch counts, like he could throw 90 pitches, he's perfect, but if he throws that 91st pitch, his arm will fall off. I was never with that. And I think what this thing taught us, the bubble, among many things, is that we need to pay more attention to travel, because the quality of the games, as we're discussing, was so high because nobody traveled. There were a few back-to-backs in there, but, I think all of us that do it for a living, I'm doing it for 21 years, and we travel nice. We travel on a charter plane. We stay in nice hotels, and the travel will beat the living heck out of you. If you don't, you really have to go out of your way to take care of yourself. So I think there's going to be more attention paid going forward to travel, to playing Chicago twice and Milwaukee twice, maybe in the same, like going out there for a week, and that would be a road trip. That kind of thing. They talk about it hurting attendance and things like that, but I think we have to focus more on that and not, look this up, guys. 2 years ago, there were 6 teams in that. There's 6 teams in that regional area. The 3 in Texas: Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, New Orleans, Memphis, and Oklahoma City. 2 years ago, we played those 6 teams. We went to those 6 places on 6 different road trips.
Oh my goodness!
Which is that's hard to do. Like that you have to go out of your way to create a schedule that defies geography like that. And that's how you end up racking up all kinds of air miles and playing back-to-backs. Instead of taking a bus from Milwaukee to Chicago or playing 2 games in a row in Chicago, you're flying from Chicago to Miami or Orlando to play a back-to-back or something crazy like that. And I think that's what they're realizing now with all the studies, and sleep studies and rest studies. I think what the bubble taught us is that the travel is much more a part of that than whether a guy plays 32 minutes or 33.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about the Rafters Celtics series. Some of those guys like Lowry played 40-plus minutes every single game. So I think that just even more speaks to the fact that you're saying that travel has this impact, especially when you think past the Celtics, like the Trailblazers out there in the middle of nowhere, traveling all the way across the country back and forth every day for a game. I saw something, I don't know if this is true, but a while ago that said the Trailblazers travel more than any other team in professional sports. And I mean, it makes sense because they're going here, there, and everywhere to play their games, because they're in Washington, they go down to Orlando, then back to California. So the Celtics is one thing. I can't imagine all these other teams.
The reason I can confirm that is because it used to be the team I went into the league with. When I went to the NBA, I was with Minnesota for 3 years. And Minnesota traveled the most miles because every team in our division was at least an hour and 45-minute flight. And at that time, Portland had Seattle and Vancouver right there. Right. Those were 20-minute flights or whatever. But once Portland was left alone, which is a geographic and city tragedy from which the NBA has never recovered, the worst trade in NBA history, was Seattle for Oklahoma City. And Vancouver for Memphis is not far behind. But, I was lucky to come into a league at a time when we had all those three cities. You could go and play all three of those teams in 4 or 5 days, and it was an easy trip. But, yeah, it used to be Minnesota because they were the easternmost team, still are, the easternmost team in the Western Conference.
Do you think they should realign the league to fit divisions more closely? Like that Northwest division is crazy because now you've got all those teams moved. You got Memphis, Minnesota, Portland, OKC. Who's the last team? Who am I missing?
Denver.
Denver, yeah. So that's like probably like at least a quarter of the country if you like do a cutout around all the cities.
It's hard to do it. I think what they really have to focus on more. And remember, we're not playing. The schedule isn't as division lopsided as it used to be. It's conference lopsided. Maybe that could change. Who knows what we're talking about, right? I mean, first of all, the 2021 season. That was one of my favorite things when I realized that there wasn't going to be. We start in January. There won't be a 2021 season. It'll just be the 2021 season. And I realized, hey, that's the same thing. And so next year is already better than this year. But that season, whatever it is next year, we have no idea what it's going to look like. None. And if we try to play 82 games, which is certainly the plan, with some limited amount of fans, you're going back to more of a traditional schedule. If we don't, I think that originally there was a bubble idea or kind of a double bubble, Eastern Conference, Western Conference. But I think players are done with that. And I think the model now is baseball and football and trying to play in arenas. But, indoors versus outdoors is a completely different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Today, Shams tweeted out that they had like a meeting and they're aiming for December 22nd with 72 games as the season. They want to be done before the Olympics.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal. I think that it really depends on how the first thing you have to decide is how you're going to play. Are you going to bubble? Are you going to wait? Where's testing? Where's a vaccine? Where's all this other stuff? And then you look at the ideal of where you want to finish. And yeah, there's no question. That's what they would like to do. How realistic that is, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the 72 games is, I feel like, less of the I'm trying to figure out a way to say this. Less of the problem. Like, I don't think people care about 82, 72. I think the quick turnaround, because all these people are coming off of 3 months of not only physically exhausting play in the bubble, but like mentally exhausted. Like, you're away from your families for so long and all of that. And then to quickly turn around 2 months later and play in December, that's such a big advantage to the teams that didn't have to play. Like Golden State, Steph and Clay haven't played in 2 years. You got to imagine they're more rested than guys like LeBron and AD. So I feel like the NBA has to find that balance, because while they want to start sooner to get revenue back up and all of this and make up for the losses, they have to worry about the players too, because they're going to be traveling again, right? So all of that.
And how much revenue can you make up if there aren't going to be fans? That's number one. And there's just a lot of different things to look at. And how you're going to play is more important than the number of games. And the argument that I've been hearing for years and years, and they want 82, that's for revenue. But if you can't have fans, you're not going to have the revenue anyway. About shortening the season, people don't realize. They're like, well, stars are sitting out, and so top players are only playing 65 games. Let's just have a 65-game season, not realizing that if you do that, then Kawhi's only going to play 50 games. So that isn't going to solve that problem.
Yeah. I think the NBA will find a nice balance. I'm confident. They've done well.
The NBA has been absolutely great with, really everything that has been thrown at them, the social justice movements, the virus. They've handled it all great. They did a great job. I have complete confidence in them. The NFL's going about their season. They've had some problems with COVID. I don't know. I feel like the NBA will have it figured out. Plus they've had the opportunity now to watch the MLB and NFL go about their seasons and to see what they're going to have to do with travel and things like that.
Yeah, I think it's just funny that people wanted to call last year like this asterisk season, and of course it was. And I think asterisk just had a bad reputation. Asterisk just means it was different, and it was. But remember, we got 80% of the season in before the pandemic. Next year is going to be a complete, a season that's completely dictated by the pandemic, and that the NBA and the NHL aren't going to get back to what remotely resembles normal until 21, 22.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully things will be better by then. Something else we wanted to bring up, we kind of jokingly brought it up earlier with all the Twitter stuff. What are your thoughts on all the trade rumors circling through Celtics media, like all this stuff that everyone loves to throw out there this time of year?
Well, we got to kill time, right? We don't have games. We're not going to have training camp for a while. I think it is normally it's just sort of fun and normally a lot of nonsense. This year, more than any other, there's two things I won't say caution, because to me it's fun. Like, have fun with the trade rumors. But here are a couple things to remember in real life. We have no idea what the salary cap and the tax are going to look like, how revenue is going to be affected here. We were inches away from the league being able to invoke a force majeure clause and get rid of the whole collective bargaining agreement if they had to shut down. So you're teetering on that to begin with. We have no idea how the revenue is going to, the dramatic nature with which it's going to drop, and what that means for the cap, what it means for the tax, all those things we don't know. That's, number one. And number two is that when you rank 28th out of 30, shaking up your team and making dramatic changes, you got a good chance to move up, right? If you're third from the bottom. If you're third from the top, you better be pretty careful as to what you're messing up, because when the answer to the question, what were the Celtics missing? What separated them from the NBA Finals, whatever, the answer is two things. Not much is the answer, but health is probably at the top of the list with the roster you have. Of course you want to tweak. Of course you want, a little more experience and more skill, more offense in the bench, all these little things if you could pick and choose. I just like to point out there are about 23, 24, 25 other teams that would gladly trade places with the Celtics with their roster and their cap and their future, which makes it harder and harder to deal when it's harder and harder to improve your team.
People don't understand that. People just think, the thing that we always talk about is the Patriots people are the worst because they are the ones that are the loudest. They really pay attention the least, and they are the least satisfied when things go wrong, especially the younger Patriots people, because they've had nothing but success, with Brady being here for most of their life. And now they see the Celtics not making the finals, and they think Gordon Hayward's bad, Marcus Smart's bad, get rid of him. And, I think the point you made about being third from the top and, improving through trades is, nails it on the head is how I feel about trading, because I personally am very cautious when it comes to trades, because you know what you have, and giving it away for something that you are unfamiliar with is a big risk, in my opinion, especially with draft picks. One thing we'll probably get to, the trade people have been talking about is Marcus Smart to Golden State for their pick. And I don't know what else is involved, but those are the main things. Do you really want to trade somebody that's Marcus, so unique, such a hustle player, makes winning plays for someone that hasn't even played a league game yet, and on top of that, hasn't even gotten a full, college season to show what they're made of? I think that's such a huge risk.
And when is James Wiseman, when are LaMelo Ball, when are those guys going to become players that impact winning in the NBA?
Right.
You are on the verge of it now. You don't want to get younger. You want to get older. And this is a problem, one of the many problems with the 2019 Celtics. I call them the Orange Vanilla Coke Celtics, because we learned that orange is great, vanilla is great, Coke is great, but you put all three of those things together, maybe not. So that was what I called last year.
It's a great name.
Well, and they were pushing that during the tournament. My wife was doing the tournament with Kevin Harlan and Reggie Miller or whatever. And every 10 minutes there was a commercial for Orange Vanilla Coke at that same time as that season was unfolding. But one of the many problems which we didn't see at the time was that the bench, and I don't want to call it the supporting players. I think of spots 4 through 9 in the roster, or after Kyrie and Horford, were young players that had not really made their place yet in the league, and they hadn't gotten their contract, and they hadn't gotten their money, and they hadn't proven that they could become very good players in this league. You look back at what Golden State did over that 5-year run. Who was in those spots for them? Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, Zaza Pachulia, guys who had already been in the league and been around. And the Celtics were trying to do that with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Terry Rozier and young guys who were still trying to figure it out. And you need that sort of older group. And it's funny when you went with Brad Wanamaker, he was a veteran. You knew what you were getting every night. And so I think you go back to that sort of Doc Rivers thing about not really liking rookies and young players and young teams. Young teams are really exciting on paper. It's fun to think of what they could do and say, oh, who's the next big thing. But we started this by talking about LeBron James, who won a championship in his 9th year. And we're talking about maybe the best player ever. And he still didn't win a championship until his 9th year. So there were certain guys around him and whatever. So I am, maybe it's, my advancing age that speaks to this, but I don't get my socks all twirling again about the best 19-year-old player out there. There's some great,
Right.
and by the way, the NBA has never been stronger. Look at the list of guys, 25 and under in the league right now. It's insane. And you probably have the second best one after Doncic, in Tatum.
Right.
So, you literally, I said, look how strong the league is. I tried to do it in a tweet. And you can't, one tweet, two tweets, and you're still going to tick people off because you're just leaving guys off the list because there's so many great under 25-year-old players in this league. So, to me, that says that those guys are going to be 24, 26, 28. Those elite players, where a guy you get now who's 19, he develops later. So I think when you're on the verge of a championship or you're around it, as the Celtics certainly were, and I'd remind you, when the Celtics were up 2-0 on Toronto, they were the favorites. They were the statistical betting.
Right.
I mean, they had the inside track, people thought, on a championship now. So that's a long way of saying I'm very wary about making major changes to a team that is this close.
I'm glad, because I agree with you. Yeah, I don't like big trades at all. I think the way I've talked about getting better the most has been through free agency, if whatever they can do with their money. But one player I particularly have been pounding the rock on, bringing back is Rondo. I just think he would be really great off the bench. He's won 2 titles now. I don't think he had the best exit from Boston, and I think it would be a very redeeming way for him to come back and contribute to a contending team. And, his know-how would be great with surrounding players like Tatum and Brown, and even Kemba if they played him off the ball. I just hope he would, if he's going to opt out, if he would want to take the money and come back. And I think Wanamaker's deal's up, so I just think it would be a decent replacement.
Fans would love it. Fans would go crazy about it. I mean, I think about Rondo. What's really among the most impressive things about Rondo, and he's a fascinating dude that is a several-hour podcast all to himself in those early years and who he became, is that he has managed to not only stay in the league, but become an efficient, effective player in a league that is completely dependent upon shooting.
Yeah.
Still can't shoot, which is amazing how he has evolved his game. When he came in the league, it looked like he was going to be the man, and then all of a sudden the league changed, and he literally had the president of the United States doing podcasts saying, yeah, Rondo's great, but he can't shoot. I mean, which messed him up for weeks, by the way, when that happened. But it's remarkable to watch, his maturity, all of it. I think everybody would love that.
Yeah.
We had one of our writers we have a site called Bannertown, Tim, write about potential free agents. He brought up a bunch of returns like Isaiah Thomas coming back, Aaron Baines and Rondo, and just talking about if any of them could have an impact. Sam's been big on Rondo. I think Baines would be great. And then there's this whole movement for Isaiah Thomas coming back to Boston, and all the reports say he's healthy now. He came out and said he's completely back to normal. Do you think Isaiah could have a role in Boston if he were to come back?
I certainly role somewhere. I mean, he deserves it. It's really one of the most bizarre that chapter in his life, in Celtics history. So many things have happened. I think we get fixated on the 80s, right? And then the new Big Three era, but there's always little pockets of time that are always fascinating to kind of look back on. And the instant love affair between Isaiah Thomas and the city and the fans was amazing. It was a symbiotic relationship. The Celtics needed someone like Isaiah Thomas, and Isaiah Thomas needed an organization like the Celtics to give him that chance and a city to love him the way Boston did. And to go from the 5th best player in the league, or finishing 5th in the MVP voting, to arguably one of the 5 worst players in the league the next year because he couldn't move. He deserves that story. Yeah. I thought Denver was a really good spot for him because Mike Malone was always a big Isaiah guy, but his body just was not willing. It'd be a great, I always think that the love for Isaiah here was so great, it undermined the Kyrie time here. That people never got,
I remember being bummed when they traded Isaiah. Even though Kyrie was such a star, I just was like, it's similar to the Marcus situation for me. That those guys are so unique and they have a bond with the city, like you say. And I feel like giving up guys like that is just a mistake. Even though, they probably got the best value out of the Kyrie trade, but obviously it still didn't meet the goal. There was no championship. Yeah.
This is what I learned. I had a fascinating moment of fatherhood there. So my son, who just turned 9, he was not quite 6 when the trade was made. And like every other 4 and 5-year-old in Boston, he absolutely adored Isaiah Thomas. Loved Isaiah. I've got great videos of showing him box scores the next morning when he woke up and he'd look across the thing and see the 53 points in his eyes. But I had a hunch. Obviously, I have information, from time to time. So I had a hunch as to what might be happening that summer. I kept warning him, listen, there's a chance that Isaiah could whatever. I talked about the different scenarios, the Kyrie Irving one, and he was with his mother that the day it happened and not with me. So I FaceTimed him. And now I've got to be a father to my almost 6-year-old and tell him that his favorite player got traded.
Oh.
And so I said, listen, buddy, you know what we've been talking about, right? With Isaiah Thomas and that he might get traded, right? He goes, yeah. He goes, did it happen? I said, yeah. It happened. And he paused for a second, and I'm waiting to see his reaction. He goes, do we got that guy from Cleveland? We got that really good player from Cleveland, Kyrie? And I said, yeah, buddy, we did. He goes, okay. That's cold, man. That's wrong. That's like not even 6 years old. He was like, just, So you get my son got what he deserved.
I had just gotten back from like the Nike outlet, and I didn't even know it. I got a pair of Isaiah Thomas shoes at Nike, and I come home and I get home and I look at my phone. I'm like, well, these shoes aren't worth much anymore.
Well,
and
I was
many things about
that
trade in that day is that having been in the NBA for 20 years as I was when that happened, if you could pick one day out of the calendar year, the old calendar, one day a year that you felt you could take the day off and you were safe from anything happening or any news, whether like August 22nd, that is the dead, like early August to mid-September is as dead as it gets in the NBA. And you could have picked that day as the single deadest day in the NBA. And all of a sudden the Celtics make this major deal.
So you mentioned like there were multiple things that could happen. Can you tell us like anything else that you might have thought might have been going on, or you can't share that?
When then?
Yeah. You said like
No, I knew that was in play.
Okay.
So I was able to kind of lay the groundwork for my son, so it wouldn't be completely.
Okay.
The one I remember of all the ones, it's funny because we just talked about him in the Woj Shams world.
Right.
Oftentimes, I've literally been with Danny Ainge when one of those guys writes something that he didn't know about.
Really?
I think the one that comes to mind is that, remember Vander Blue? We signed Vander Blue to a 10-day contract.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I was with Danny when that happened, and he didn't know that the whole thing was done or whatever. That when one of them, Woj, I think, reported. So that's how far ahead they get. So the point being, when the Rondo trade happened, that one I knew about it was a very bizarre thing to live 3 or 4 days ahead of Woj at that time, because I knew the Rondo trade was happening. And like it happened, I would say on a Thursday, and it was like Sunday or Monday. You have to look it up. We were in Philadelphia, and I'm like, this thing's happening. And he still had 2 more games to play, as it turned out, because I remember, just please don't let this break. You're prepared with all your Rondo stats and all your everything that you have to, if you're in my spot, for when it happens. And I'm like, please don't let it happen Thursday, just not Thursday. Anytime you're waiting. And of course, I'm at like Edaville Railroad with my son, however old he was at that point. He's like 2 or 3 years old, 3. And I have him trying to tweet while I'm on like one of the, the merry-go-rounds with the 3-year-old. And of course, that's when it went down. But it is, you're always going to hear things ahead of time. The Garnett thing in 2007, obviously those are the 2 organizations I was most tapped into. So I knew for a long time. I remember sort of trying to drum up interest and sort of love in the idea. I remember being on talk shows on EEI and telling the host, John Dennis at the time, like, ask me about if there's anything the Celtics could be doing, because people didn't understand in 2007 who Kevin Garnett was. Not just how great a player he was, but the impact. And I remember, I had been in Minnesota. I knew the potential for what it would be. I knew that he and Boston were soulmates that had been apart, and if they ever got together, it would be a marriage made in basketball and sports heaven. But it's again forgotten part of history, and you guys are almost probably too young to even remember it. But there was pretty strong sentiment. The concept there was Al Jefferson. And I think all of us had done such a good job in building up Al Jefferson to be the next big thing that nobody wanted to trade Al Jefferson away.
Right.
And there was a poll in the Boston Herald in 2007, would you trade Al Jefferson for Kevin Garnett? And 80% of the people said no. And I just remember that entire spring sort of like carrying the water of just talking about Kevin Garnett, like do people realize what it could be? And there were a couple of different versions of that early on that had Wally Szczerbiak before he went to, Seattle. Obviously, Minnesota won Rondo. There was a lot of that thing went on. That was what, July 31st, August 1st. That was going on from the time that season had ended, in April.
Mm-hmm. This whole Woj and Shams thing is crazy. Oh, sorry, my bad. I was just talking more about how crazy this is because, like, we see scenarios where, like, Harrison Barnes was playing a game when Woj and Shams dropped the report that he was traded, and they had to take him off the sideline and everything, and all these pictures. I mean, respect to him for still sitting on the bench and not trying to get upset or crack a smile or whatever. But it's crazy how far ahead these guys get. Sorry, Sam, you can go ahead with what you wanted to say.
Do you have any trades that never happened that there was a lot of win behind? Because this is so interesting to me that you kind of know things that are going on.
It's also one of those, like, Shakespeare thinks me knows too much, like never got out and whatever. I think there were a lot of them involving Ray Allen, obviously, in in that time period in 2010. There was certainly one. I will tell you guys this: there was one involving Ray Allen and Tracy McGrady with Boston. And I remember feeling at the time, as the discussion was going on, that it sounds really interesting, but that Paul Pierce and Tracy McGrady overlapped more than Paul Pierce and Ray Allen did.
For sure.
That's why it wouldn't, it would not have worked. There's always a million of them. I think the O.J. Mayo thing was something that got out. That was a conversation. He ended up not wanting to really to come here. So there's always, what I always talk about with trade rumors is that if somebody calls Danny Ainge and says, I'll give you Fred VanVleet for Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Kemba Walker, and Gordon Hayward, and Danny Ainge says, that's crazy, and hangs up, Danny Ainge has discussed a trade that would send, by definition, he has discussed it.
Yeah.
By saying that's insane and hanging up. So, and the old Jerry Seinfeld joke about the two guys that walk out of back when we had newspapers, the two guys that walk out of a newspaper at the end of the day, and one says to the other, man, we just made it. Everything fit. If one more thing happens today, we're screwed. Like, we wouldn't have been able to fit it in the joke being that wherever there's content that has to be created, there are websites and rumors, things have to be, you got to make up stuff to fill all that time. Right. Mm-hmm. And it's fun, but it's not necessarily real.
Mm-hmm. You always question the validity of some of these things going on. But the next thing we wanted to bring up, kind of looking back at this past season, which Celtics rookie from like last year, so I'm talking Grant Williams, Romeo Langford, do you think has the potential to take the biggest leap next season? Like people have talked about Romeo Langford and his defense. Grant Williams obviously showed amazing potential. Then there's guys like Carson and Tremont, both showed some potential in different places. So who do you see having the potential to take that leap?
I don't see Grant Williams really taking much of a leap because I think that's who Grant Williams is going to be, and he's going to be in the league for a long time. Being that guy. That's how you get paid and stay in the league for a long time, is you become the player that Grant Williams already is. It's like he was born to be an NBA role player and play that spot and just be the kind of guy you want to have on your team. I think that, Romeo is certainly the most intriguing
I agree.
player. And certainly I think, Tremont Waters is going to be a 4A player. Like, I think he's going to bounce back and forth. We've seen guys like that, the Rick Brunsons of the world, that stay in the league for a long time because they can give you NBA minutes. And, between the G League coming back and forth. But I think Romeo Langford, if he can stay healthy, is kind of like, I'm not a big believer in guys being injury prone. You can just have bad luck early in your career, or bad luck like Gordon Hayward late in your career. I think that's obviously the guy to watch because we saw very brief flashes of high-level NBA defense from Romeo Langford, and that's what sort of catches my eye. The reason the Celtics are an elite team now is because we are in a Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown world. That's what the league is. It's not a point guard dominated league right now. It's not a big man dominated league. It's 6'7" wing guys that can defend multiple positions, and Romeo Langford could be one of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. Anytime like we talk about Romeo on this podcast, like I like to remind people how great he was when he got the nod to start a couple games. I know Orlando was one of them, and I think Atlanta was another, and he played like really solid minutes in both those games. And he even had some impact plays down the stretch in the Orlando game, if I remember correctly. So he definitely has the potential to be a contributor on a good team. But it's interesting you mentioned earlier about, the age being important for the the 4 through 9 guys, and if that will be a factor with him or not.
Yeah, I just don't. It's tough to be a young player. There's pros and cons of being a young player on a very good team.
Right.
Because you're around elite players and you sort of see how winning is done, but you don't get to play. So, what's the best way to develop in the NBA? Is the best way to develop playing 8 minutes a game or 10 minutes a game on a really good team, or is the best way to develop playing 28, 30 minutes on a bad team?
I mean, so far we've got to see it pan out. Well, Jason Tatum got big minutes his rookie year, but Jaylen Brown did not, and he has panned out very well. And he's really underrated by a lot of outside people that aren't Celtics fans because they don't realize how great he is. But, I think that's a good idea for them to kind of let players sit back and watch, at least on these Celtics teams. You had him on that Isaiah Thomas team that went to the conference finals. Romeo had a very similar rookie year to Jaylen. So I think the second year for Romeo can be very interesting.
Yeah, I think second years, and this was a weird time in the bubble because it was like a mini off-season
year
jump.
1.5.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think there's any question. I think there'll be a lot of eyeballs on him. Again, going back to how the schedule was put together, and are they compressing games, and are you going to need more guys to play minutes if in a season in which if you're trying to squeeze a lot of games in a short amount of time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like Romeo. He showed good defense in the bubble too. Unfortunate he only got to play 81 seconds one of those games in the playoffs, but
it was really crazy because he hurt himself and like he tore a ligament, and they were like, yeah he's gonna play again. Like, how do you play with a torn ligament? Like that's pretty serious stuff. I'm not.
How much they just wanted him to play defense.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, it's impressive. But speaking of last season and year 1.5, I guess. It's tough to point out one thing as like the quote unquote best takeaway, but I just wanted to get some of your thoughts on what do you think the biggest things to take away from last season are moving forward? Was it Jason Tatum's huge development post February? We know February Tatum was a big thing. Jaylen Brown's consistency, or is there anything you think is the biggest thing from last year?
Well, I think that's the one thing that we always said, and Max and I said a lot, is that Kemba was great at the start of the year, and he deserved his all-star spot. People forget just how good he was, like coming out of the gate after that opening night game in Philadelphia. And Gordon Hayward was having an all-star caliber year until he got hurt. He wasn't an all-star consideration, not because of the quality of his play, but because he missed so many games, in November and December in that early part of the year. And that Jason Tatum, once he got to January, just took off to the next level. And you understood why he was an all-star, why everyone was having the conversations about him, but that there was little question to us, to Max and I, that Jaylen Brown was the Celtics' best player throughout the course of the year, that he just did this throughout the year and then got better.
Consistency.
And the beauty of one of the many great things about last year, and all Celtic fans wanted after 2019 was, forget the wins and losses. Just give me a team I can root for, because I hated that team so much in 2019. And you not only got a team you could root for, not only did you get a team that played and was in virtually every game and was challenging the franchise record for most consecutive games without a double-digit loss. It was 44 in a row until the fourth quarter got away in the last game against Miami. They had not lost games since February by 10 points. That game in Houston, they literally had a chance to win every single game from February through the stoppage, through the bubble, through the conference finals. They had a chance to win every game until that last one. So when you look at a season like that, you realize that, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, one made the All-Star team, one didn't, and both got better after that. Just like Jaylen Brown had the chip on his shoulder, whatever it was, and got better. Jason Tatum rose to the occasion of it. And I think the one thing we don't really know is the great mystery of last year is Kemba Walker's health and where it really was during that time. And maybe he was completely healthy, and it's just, he had that slump the way Ray Allen had a slump and that everybody forgets in the 2008 playoffs. He really struggled in the Cleveland-Detroit portion of the playoffs.
Yeah, I think Kemba's knees were a big thing. Obviously, Gordon Hayward had freak injuries. We always debate on the show, whether you said you don't believe in injury prone, whether Hayward is injury prone or just has bad luck, because at a certain point you don't know. But then again, all these injuries are so disconnected to each other, like that freak leg injury, no one could predict that. And then the hand, it's just all these things, like he's just bumping into people and breaking bones at this point. But it's all a matter of whether you think it's him as a player or just freak things, and he's just the unluckiest man in the NBA at this point. But Sam, I know there's some questions you always like to ask, including a specific one about favorite moments or something. So I'll let you take the floor.
Yeah. Every time we have a new guest on, Sean, I always have like an end of the show rundown kind of questions I like to ask. The first one being, what is the most interesting piece of Celtics memorabilia you might have? I know, you might not have grown up as a Celtics fan, but you have like your Mets World Series ticket in the background, things like that. And what's like the story?
You know what game that is, right?
Is that the Bill Buckner game?
I was there, my friends. That's how old I am.
Man. Crazy.
Well, let's see. Since we're doing show and tell, it's always like the big finish, the big dramatic finish. Celtics memorabilia. I would imagine this one would be hard to top.
Oh, wow.
What is it? Oh, it's a ring. Yeah. Yep.
What is that? Yes.
Have your screens cut off on my screen. That's why I couldn't see it right away. But yeah,
I can see it clearly.
That's pretty tough to beat.
Yeah, I was single at the time, so when I got this, it was always a very like, hey, call.
Yeah.
That worked out nice. And it was a popular show and tell item for a while.
That was actually one of my questions I was going to ask if they gave you a ring. But that must mean Gorman has a ring for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think Tommy gets rings every time they win?
I'm sure Tommy got one in 08. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Tommy's probably got more rings than Russell now. But that's awesome. That's so cool.
You asked about memorabilia. That's always like that.
Yeah, that's so cool. All right. So you are at every game, so usually this is a two-part question, but since you're at every game, what is your favorite moment you've got to witness live? I will cancel out the championship because that's probably an obvious number one.
Yeah, obviously being in the finals, doing a seventh game of the finals. I think I always felt that for me as an announcer, when you recognize you're in the middle of history, and a month before that, as it was happening in real time, I remember feeling like I have this game. As a play-by-play announcer, you hear us talk about like having control of the plane, like when you really have it, like when you're calling a good game. And combined with the history that was happening, it was obvious as the Paul Pierce-LeBron Game 7 was happening that you were in the middle of something that was going to be remembered and discussed, for a very long time. And obviously there are the finals, and I have a story that I always tell about Game 7, which is sitting next to Doris Burke, who's a great friend of mine, in the middle of it's Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and you're looking around, and Jack Nicholson's over here, and Stallone and Eddie Murphy and Steven Spielberg are there, and Dustin Hoffman's 3 rows behind you, and it's the Celtics and Lakers Game 7 that we grew up watching. And she went to interview Doc at the end of the first quarter, and they hand out the stat sheets, and I flipped mine over. It was just a blank piece of paper, and I drew 2 circles on it and put it in front of her for when she sat back down. And the big circle said world, and the little circle said us, right in the middle, because that's what it felt like. We were just like kicking each other under the table. Like, do you believe where we are? And Game 7 of the NBA Finals is going on. The whole world's watching, and we're right in the middle of it. Back in, what from broadcasting standpoint was the good old days when we were, courtside. 08 was the last year in Boston. So you always see Max and I when a lot of these old games were on during the early days of the pandemic. Those are the, Max and I sitting courtside, and you were like literally right in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's super cool. And it was like a good game too. It wasn't like a blowout. So you had those moments happening in front of you throughout the whole game. That's awesome.
Yeah, I remember like as an announcer, the first Game 7 I ever got to call was against Indiana in 2005. And I remember really being locked in, and you feel like you're going to have a great game, and then the game completely lets you down, and that was a terrible game, and a blowout game, and a loss. And it's not the loss; it was just that it was a blowout game, and it's like, well, what a big letdown. And I think you knew the game, bringing everything full circle from the start of the conversation. I had a hunch. In Game 5 in 2012 in Miami, Celtics win. They go up 3-2. It's an amazing game. Paul Pierce hits that dagger shot. And Max is going on and on about how great, amazing the environment's going to be in Boston and OKC and the finals and whatever. And as we were wrapping up, I said, but if ever a scenario was set up for LeBron to change his legacy, it's Friday night, or whatever, Thursday night at the Garden. And so it was very clear it was going to be history made that night, just as 2 years earlier, SportsCenter had everybody on their roster at the Garden for Game 6 of that second round series, knowing it could be LeBron's last game. And I think the ones you remember are the ones that you're in the middle of history.
Right.
And, particularly as you get older, particularly as we all watched Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, and where things belong in the history of this league, that you just want to document it properly.
Mm-hmm.
That's such an awesome answer because, you have the opportunity, unlike, anybody else we've ever spoken to have been there and actually have like a part in the games that are happening. And, usually the answer we get is like, the most popular one for sure is the Marcus Smart double charges. And I personally think that's an incredible moment. Yeah. And then what's another one? The Isaiah Thomas 50-point games is another one. The Game 2 against Washington.
Kelly Olynyk game.
Yeah, the Kelly Olynyk game. But yeah, like
7.
the big stage is such an interesting thing that I personally never even think about. Like you getting to be involved in that is so awesome. Like that's like everybody's dream.
Well, you just want to do it right. Like you're aware that you're not to knock any other franchise in the NBA, but when you're the voice of the Boston Celtics, it's the voice of the New York Yankees, the Montreal Canadiens, or whatever. There's a long history that goes with it, and it's going to be remembered.
Let's see what else. We usually Jack is the jersey guy, but like it's a little different for you because I can't imagine as a play-by-play commentator you have many jerseys to wear around.
No, I do have. I collect. It's funny. It's not behind me. I collect Negro League stuff. So I have.
Okay.
I have some old. I have like a Jackie Robinson Montreal thing. I've got like a Homestead Grays, Josh Gibbs. So I collect things like that. I wear. Well, here's something. Here's a scoop just for your podcast that like 2 other people know. I don't like. It's a really ridiculous thing. I hate dress socks. Okay.
Dress
I hate
socks.
Those thin.
I don't like
socks.
them either.
No,
I don't see the
anybody
point.
likes them, but everybody wears them. I hate them so much that every game I've ever called in the NBA, whatever, I wear thick white sweat socks like you wear on a regular day, and I wear the thin black dress sock over it. I just don't like, it makes me feel whatever. So the thin black socks I wear are Negro League. They're Kansas City Monarchs socks.
Yeah,
and they're
that's
different.
super cool.
There's like Negro League, whatever. So like Mark Jackson's like the only one that knows because he's a big Negro League guy too. But these are like that's the only where like souvenirs come into.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Okay, so for you especially, you get to work with Max every game. Do you have a favorite Cedric Maxwell moment during a commentary? He always says these crazy things. I mean, I'm sure something stands out.
I will skip the one that involves bad language, which he used on the air, inadvertently, not realizing we were on the air. But there are, I think, sort of the way we fit together makes for those moments. So there's 100 to choose from, but I always like the one when he would try to reach a little farther than his grasp. And in talking about a player, I forget who it was one night, he said, I just thought it was just such a Grande and Max moment. He said he has that certain je ne sais pas. And so I let that sit there in the air for a second, and that he has that certain I don't know. And he goes, yeah. I'm like, okay, good enough. That'll have to do. Listen, I think every successful broadcast pair, every successful inside the NBA is the best studio show ever done. And here's the reason why. Because this is what has in common with all great TV shows. At the end of the day, you know that the characters genuinely love each other, right? Regardless of the family squabbles that they have.
Right.
And I think that the element that it was Max who first called me when I was in Minnesota. I turned down the job 3 times in the summer of 2001. And it was Max who called me when I first started thinking about it seriously, because I thought we could be better than the sum of the parts, that it could be a thing. And here we are you guys were little kids when that happened, and 19 years later,
Yeah.
we're talking about here. We still are. We're going down into the bubble of the Celtics locker room to call playoff games, and we've been all over the country and almost done 2,000 games together. So pretty crazy.
That's incredible.
That's amazing.
So I have like 2 more questions, then we'll finish up. So you get to travel with the team. My mom's friend is actually one of the flight attendants for you guys, Renee.
I love Renee.
Yeah, she's awesome. Yeah. So what do you have like a favorite travel story with the team? Anything you've seen happen on the plane that's interesting? Anything along those lines.
Well, in my eventual book one day, we'll probably talk about the flight from hell, which was in 2008. If I say games from 2008, as young as you guys are, you'll remember them because there were significant milepost games. One of them was the game in Houston, part of the Texas Triangle sweep, in which the Rockets had won 21 in a row, and the Celtics just demolished them that night. It was a Tuesday night TNT game because it was NCAA tournament time, whatever. And we went to Dallas from there and completed the Texas Triangle. And we had 2 days. It was a Tuesday night game in Houston, Thursday night game in Dallas, and the weather was very, very bad. But we decided we're going to go anyway. And as it turns out, the pilot had given Doc, because Doc should have say in the flight plan, for God's sake. He basically, we had 2 choices here. We can take like an hour and 40-minute flight and go all the way around all the storms, whatever, or it'll be a 40-minute flight right through it. What do you think he chose?
Right through the storm.
But he was always, was that a rough flight? I didn't even notice I was working. I'm like, as the rest of us are peeling our fingernails off so we took, the long story short, we took 2 lightning strikes. About 15 minutes after takeoff. This is the forgotten story. The 2008 championship almost didn't happen because anyone who was on that plane, ask any of the players from the 2008 season, they'll remember that flight from Houston to Dallas, which we were rushing to get there when the game wasn't for 2 days, and it was just we fly for a living. I've been on thousands and thousands of flights, so the ones that are. Listen, we've had a ton of aborted landings at Hanscom. I've been in a couple of emergency land. Stuff happens, right? But this was literally what I like Mike Gorman who flew, in the military. He and I are both sort of aviation people, and we look at the weather and whatever. And I like to go to the pilot for the flight because you'll say, hey, what's it going to be like up there? And then the pilot will give you that pilot stuff, right? Like, oh yeah, there's a couple of clouds up there. We're going to do this thing and we're going to fly up and, whatever. And it's going to be great. That night I get on the plane and to try to do that trick so I can get the reassurance. And I said, well, how bad is it out there? He goes, it's bad. Like that. That's it. That's all I get. We also, a couple of years ago, do you remember the bomb cyclone in Boston about 2 years ago, I'd say?
Vaguely, yeah.
I don't know if I remember.
We were flying to Houston that day, and the Logan was closed, and we took off anyway into it.
Oh,
that was,
wow.
Oh, my goodness.
And the reason we could do it is because when you take off, all you have to do is hit the sky, right? So you just have to keep the thing going up no matter how bad, how insane the turbulence is. You can go upside down as long as you're going up. And there were no other planes in the sky because they grounded everything because of the weather. And the pilot comes on and says, well, Mother Nature's going to have her way with us the first 10, 15 minutes. I was like, what? And so there are times you think, this is the stuff they don't tell you about in the brochure. Because you guys are like, man, Grande's got a great job. He's got the greatest job in the world. There's some stuff they leave out of the brochure.
I guess Houston's a bad omen.
Houston's a bad omen.
Houston involved with both the terrible flights.
Connected to Houston.
And then the last thing I'm going to ask is, you mentioned KG and the Celtics were like a match made in heaven. Are there any players that aren't currently on the Celtics now around the league that you think would be great fits like that with the attitude, the culture? I personally have one that I'll mention after. I'm just curious.
I know you're talking about.
Give me yours.
All right. So I think Joel Embiid would be a great Celtic because I think he's got, I don't know, the people would love him. He's like a competitive guy.
He's an entertainer.
To KG. He's an entertaining guy. I just think he would really fit well with the city and the culture behind the Celtics. I wonder about that.
I think the lack of intensity might drive people crazy. Like he's sort of the anti-KG that way. That's why, to me, the KG thing was, like an obvious perfect fit with those two. That's an interesting one. I always felt, again, that we've moved past a player you'd be adding now, although he's still playing in the league this year. I always thought Joakim Noah would have been that guy.
Yeah.
Fans would have really loved him. Smart guy. He would have been engaging with the media, whatever, and played a certain role on the team. It's interesting, because we have Marcus Smart is the defensive Kyle Lowry, right? Like Kyle Lowry would have been that. I think Boston loves guys like that. That guys that sort of overachieve and just scrap and stay in your face, which is what that pretty much is the symbol of. It's why like Jeff Green was sort of the anti. Everybody waited for it, but it wasn't there.
It didn't come.
Yeah.
We're both big Jeff Green guys. That's really when we
super
both got.
Listen, great guy, super talented. It's not his fault.
No,
of
course.
Right. That's the thing. There was a Celtics had a player again. He goes too young in 2004, named Chris Mim, and he was in a league. Played at the University of Texas, whatever. Good player, had a good career, but like he was a great tennis player. He didn't love basketball, but he was 7 feet tall and he was good at it. Jeff Green, God made Jeff Green a basketball player, but he didn't make him someone who loves the game. It's not Jeff Green's fault.
Right.
It's the same way, again, another topic for another time. It's why the Kyrie Irving thing here, Kyrie Irving in Boston for 2 years, you know who he was? He was Kyrie Irving. Same dude he was in Cleveland, same dude he's going to be for better, worse, whatever. Really fascinating guy, all the above. But we think that people are going to change sometimes and he didn't.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff Green didn't love basketball up until Game 7 in a Cavs.
Right,
yeah.
He loved it that night.
Loved it enough.
I'll tell you. I'll give you guys there's a little podcast scoop for you. Doc Rivers texted me during that game, as I was calling it, Game 7, something to the effect of finally Jeff Green has a like a great game in Boston or whatever.
Man, love the inside scoop. Anyways, really appreciate you coming on the show, Sean. Thanks for coming.
We couldn't thank you enough.
Thank you for your enthusiasm and all of it. You're the reason that we do what we do.
Really appreciate it. Sam, you want to give us the old outro as usual here?
You can follow Sean. What is it? At Sean Grande play-by-play on Twitter.
PBP, yeah.
PBP.
Like initials.
Yep. Follow him. He's always got the best stats in the game for sure. Where do you get your stats? I meant to ask you that. Like, I mean, I know you come up with them, but where do you get the creativity?
A lot of it myself. It's sort of institutional memory, and something that comes because you'll remember a game. Again, very long story short. After every game, I do about 15, 20, 25 minutes of stat work where I have a little file, and 20 or 20 minutes of work doesn't seem like a lot to put. Okay, here's a 30-point game here, or a 31-point game, or this. They overcame a 15-point deficit. They trail by 12. But if you think 20 minutes a game for 2,000 games, pretty soon I've got 20 years worth of, so I know pretty quickly, here are the top Celtic comebacks of the last 20 years. I can do that very quickly during a game. So that's where it comes from. A lot of it's sort of institutional memory or a stat that I see at some point and I hang on to it knowing, that might be something later.
It's crazy.
So yes, follow Sean at Sean Grande PBP. We couldn't thank you enough for coming on. We really appreciate it. We were super pumped. You were the first guest that my parents knew who they were. Believe it or not. When I told them.
They're in itself. That's the greatest honor of the day for
me. But you can follow us at Bannertown USA. You can follow Jack at Bannertown Jack. I'm Bannertown Sam. You can follow me there. That's our show for today. Goodbye.